look at you, just bam!
We need some new chairs in here for sure.
Yeah, I know, it's not the most comfortable thing.
So one component of many DUIs is field sobriety tests. That's where they ask you to stand and follow something with your eyes, to walk back and forth, and to stand in place. The last one I'm going to talk about is the one-leg stand, and that's where you're typically directed to stand in one place, raise one of your feet off the ground, focus on it, and don't move. It's a balanced divided attention test. Now, it sounds pretty simple, but a lot of people have trouble with it, and a lot of people have trouble with it, unfortunately, in many cases because they're intoxicated. However, there are other reasons you can have trouble with it that have nothing to do with intoxication. And these are things such as being overweight. Officers need to account for a certain body weight when they do the test. Somebody who's more than 50 pounds overweight is going to be assumed to have trouble with that test regardless of whether they're intoxicated. Officers don't account for that. It hurts the results, which helps your case. The other thing, footwear. Standing on one leg in sandals is different than standing on one leg in high heels or boots. Officers need to account for the footwear involved. Sometimes they don't. That helps your case. Lastly, where you're doing it. Standing in one leg on the shoulder of 290 with cars buzzing by you at 90 miles an hour is a little different than standing on one leg on a quiet suburban street where there's nobody else there. Additionally, weather conditions, rain, snow, slipperiness, all these things affect the person's ability to complete this test, and they're not at all related to intoxication. Failure on the police's part to account for these and to provide the best environment is definitely something that can help your case.
So a few years ago, I remember this DUI trial where I was cross-examining a sheriff's police officer. This arresting officer was a sheriff, and he was so bad. And I started to key in on this right away, especially when it came to the horizontal gaze Nystagmus test. That's a field sobriety test where they put the finger in front of your eyes like that, right? And I could tell, like, as soon as I started asking him questions about it, he had no clue. He either totally forgotten how it works or maybe was never even trained on it. Because he couldn't give the instructions, he couldn't, talk to the conclusions or what that test is supposed to even indicate. He was so bad that the judge, in the middle of this officer's testimony, the judge says, "Okay, thank you, Sheriff, that'll be enough, you can go now." And as soon as he left that room, it was a quick not guilty for my client.
The number one way I always look at is whether or not the officer had probable cause to stop or pull over the client. That's one of the benefits of us having the squad video. We could see the reason for the stop. So if the officer indicates they didn't stop at a stop sign, didn't use their turn signal, was committing improper lane usage, any basically violation of the Illinois Vehicle Code, I can see if that actually occurred. If I don't see that on the squad video, then I can file a motion to suppress the evidence that was gathered as a result of that illegal stop. And if and when we're successful, then the state doesn't have anything that came thereafter, and usually the case is dismissed.
Right offhand, I can think of a case where I had a case set for trial, and I had an angle I was going on was whether my client was in actual physical control of the vehicle. The vehicle was found off in a forest preserve near the DuPage River, and where this area occurred was right on the borderline of two counties. But I was going on an actual physical control of the vehicle. So we go through a trial. As we're doing this, next thing you know, the arresting officer testifies that, because usually when the prosecutor wraps up a case, they say, did all the following events happen in DuPage County in the city of Naperville? Well, he testified, no, it was Will County. In this case, is being heard in DuPage County. So at that point, on my motion, the case was dismissed, finding a not guilty, improper venue, proper jurisdiction, case was over with. And it wasn't even the angle I was going on. So that was a funny result. The best thing about that was that I did my research ahead of the trial, and I knew exactly where this was in that county. And it wasn't DuPage County, it was not in Will County. So the officer's testimony, even though he thought he was being forthright about this, sank the case, but it ended up not being true. So we got a good result on that. I think my client was not in actual physical control of the vehicle anyway. It wasn't her vehicle. She was passed out in the back seat. So everything worked out, I think, as it should have.
One of the elements that a prosecutor has to prove in court is that the defendant was in actual physical control of the vehicle. I had a case recently that we beat the DUI where my client was not in her car. It was running with the keys in the ignition. She was 10 feet away from her vehicle and her husband was outside with her. So the state couldn't meet their burden of proving her guilty beyond a reasonable doubt because they couldn't actually prove that she was in actual physical control.
One of the ways that I've beaten a DUI was a private property argument. Now, this solely was applicable to the hearing on the statutory summary suspension. We were able to have the client keep her license because of the private property argument. Officers did not observe the client driving at all, and the only time they saw her near a vehicle was as it was parked on a Chili's parking lot. Because of that argument and that argument alone, the client's license was not suspended, and we were able to get a successful result in her favor.
So one of the methods I use pretty frequently at a nearby large city is called a demand, and what that boils down to is from the minute that you're arrested, from the day that you're arrested, there's a certain amount of time available for the prosecution to make the case. You set the case for trial, you file your demand, cop doesn't show up, they don't give you the evidence, can't have a trial, not your fault, they lose days. After 160 days of that, the case is over. Doesn't matter if they show up on day 161 with enough evidence to convict you, case is over. That works really well at one specific courthouse in Cook County.
One way to beat a DUI is arguing bad weather. So bad weather obviously can affect somebody's driving. It could affect if they couldn't stop at a stop sign, if they couldn't stop at that thick white line at a stoplight. It's also going to affect their performance on the field sobriety test. If you can imagine somebody trying to stand on one leg or walk heel to toe on slick pavement, or if it's snowing, that's going to affect their balance and all that kind of stuff. So one way to beat a DUI is by bad weather.
Another scenario that we run into, and it used to happen a lot more often, but now with technology, we're getting a little bit better results on this. And that's where the police officers' reports don't match up with the video. So sometimes, and especially in the old days, you could look at a police report and say, oh, my client didn't do well there, he failed this test. It starts looking like it's a really bad case. Until you get a chance to look at the video. And it turns out that a lot of what the officer put down, let's be fair and just say it's an exaggeration of how the motorist actually looked on the road. So it's important, and I think we do this very well in this office, is review all the discovery, including the police reports and the videos, to make sure everything matches up. Because if they don't match up, then you can really impeach that arresting officer. And if it comes down to officer credibility and you find holes in the report and you can verify that with police reports, that's an excellent way to beat a DUI.
Another way that we can beat a DUI, and I have successfully, is walk and turn tests. There are a few things that a police officer or the arresting officer needs to keep in mind before they make the arrest or before they even perform these tests. It's a divided attention test. So that means that while doing it, the officer can't ask the client to do additional stuff, or there cannot be additional distractions because it's taking away from the divided attention test.
Another way that I've beaten a DUI is very simple and clear cut. When an individual is driving in a single lane, weaving to the left or to the right of that lane without crossing that divider is not a traffic violation. Officers will tend to use this observation frequently to determine if the person that they are about to pull over is in fact driving under the influence. However, it is not a traffic violation to weave within a single lane without crossing that divider.
Just the other day, I was able to win one for our client because the officer was not in court. But this wasn't just luck. This officer, we handle a lot of cases in this courthouse. So I knew that this officer, this trooper actually, was on paternity leave. Now, we've had other cases with him. He hasn't showed up in court recently in the prior weeks leading up to this. And I had gotten word that he was on paternity and he was out until the end of next month. Thankfully, our firm keeps a database on these things. We know as soon as we find that information out, it is circulated within our system among the attorneys in our office. So I was able to set this case for a hearing, knowing full well that this officer would not be able to appear, the time was going to expire, and I was able to get my client's license back.